I'm actually at the Strategic Studies Institute, which belongs to the Army, so I have to say that I'm expressing my own views and not those of the Army or the Department of Defense. The movement of the Islamic resistance, Hamas, reflects the unique circumstances marking the Palestinian experience, namely their lack of sovereignty, the occupied territories' Bantustan status, the deplorable condition of the Palestinian refugee communities throughout the Middle East, the factionalization of their leadership, and it is also one of the Palestinian responses to the Islamic awakening or revival that took place throughout the Muslim world. I will reflect on certain continuities in Hamas's history, but I will also point out that the movement has evolved and has been very flexible indeed. Emerging from the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, Hamas bears all the hallmarks of the Brothers, or Ikhwan, who call for dawah, reform, and Islamization of society, adala, social justice, and hakmiyah, the sovereignty of God, which can only be realized through the Sharia. And like all Ikhwan, they accept any Muslim who calls him or herself a Muslim. In other words, they are not a takfirist group. They are not like Al-Qaeda. They are not like the Darmoush-led Islamic Army in Gaza and some other smaller groups. They do aim for consensus. They do have somewhat of a democratic process and have always had in their organization, intended to inhibit factionalism. They are pragmatic. They have avoided conflict whenever possible with countries other than Israel. It hasn't always been possible. Hamas embodied both Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brothers, vision of an Islamic populist movement and developed a revolutionary Palestine-first approach. So whatever its relationship has been to the political process, it has set about serving the economic, social, spiritual, and political needs of the Palestinians and those of prisoners, very large segment of Palestinian population being prisoners. Some questions arose about Hamas. Why is it that Islamism, modern Islamism anyway, belatedly emerged amongst Palestinians? This really has to be answered by looking at the Arab nationalist orientation of the PLO and Egypt's, Jordan's, and Israel's controls over religious institutions and discourse. Certainly, Egypt tried quite hard to destroy the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brothers, put them out of business. By the 1960s, they had very little prestige in Gaza. And when the strong personality shaping the organization, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, a quadriplegic Gazan educator, returned to Gaza, decided to focus on his own field and to create in it a response to the spiritual and psychological devastation after 1967, he really faced an uphill task. The Ikhwan of the West Bank were, if anything, perceived even more negatively than the Ikhwan of Egypt. And so Yassin's efforts in the Islamic Society and later in the organization called the Mujamma al-Islami were deemed non-political by the Israeli authorities who licensed these groups. That was serendipitous for him. And while providing social, economic, and medical aid, he and his cohorts tried to awaken an Islamist vision, and they did so through the printing and distribution of segments of Sayyid Qutb's book, Fi Zill al-Quran. Maybe you've heard of Ma'alim fi Tariq, which was Qutb's more radical later book. This book is a remarkable, huge, elevated discussion of the art of the Quran, and it's interesting to start out that way. As this happened, a lot of other things went on. Both in Egypt and in Kuwait, young Islamist Palestinians began to disengage from the other nationalist groups and form their own organizations. And this also happened abroad in the UK and elsewhere, later providing a much-needed layer of external leadership. In Gaza, the Ikhwan were able to increase their presence in many mosques and began the project of the Islamic University, which was the first institute of higher learning in Gaza, where this pattern of rivalries with Fatah and manipulation by Yasser Arafat were very much in evidence. And this type of endeavor, student parties in Palestinian universities and secondary schools, were very important to Hamas throughout the 80s. According to insiders in the organization, the group began planning for armed resistance long prior to the Intifada, but they knew they weren't ready. They began facing competition with another new group, Islamic Jihad. And when the Intifada began, Hamas announced its existence and proclaimed jihad as the vehicle for liberation, and that was really new for the brothers at that time. This was a period of trial and error for the organization. These arrests by the Israelis in 1988 and 1999 particularly caused its leadership from then on to be mostly directed from outside. And the real outcome of the Intifada was a profound uncertainty, an existential crisis for Hamas, because it caused the Arab governments and the PLO to seek resolution in Madrid and then in Oslo. So in the Oslo period, the group had a mixed experience. The deportation of 413 Hamas members to Lebanon in 1992 actually boosted the group's legitimacy, as did the Mishal affair, when the Israelis tried to poison Mishal in Jordan, and in Sheikh Yassin's tour of the Arab world. At the same time, Hamas faced virulent opposition from the PLO because Israel demanded that group contain them. And this was really aggravated in a number of incidents, testing Hamas's line that it is a fraternal organization, that ultimately, and it has this line now, it does seek reconciliation with Fatah. After all, they have basically the same aim, which is to alleviate the Palestinian situation. In the Oslo period, Hamas grew many services, attracted many educated groups, for example, an entire women's movement within it. And then with the second Intifada and Hamas's increased actions against the Israelis and the inter-Palestinian strife and corruption prior to the elections of 2006, Palestinians really looked to Hamas as an antidote for everything that was going wrong. Its seemingly contradictory statements about a political solution are similarly rooted in its history. It has at many different times, going back to 1988, offered a truce to Israel, an interim peace, but at the same time, its discourse also concerns an ultimate solution. And there are members who support a two-state solution and members who do not. What many people say is this is possibly modifiable by referendum. That's one thing that they talk about, but that a solution cannot exclude the rights of refugees or the status of Jerusalem. So I am done. I will be happy to answer questions.